Good evening. We're live on BBC One tonight. We want you to be part of this programme. Let's bring the number up straight away. Really important programme for you to be part of. There's the number, 030 30 80 55 55. Tonight, the new leader of the DUP, Gavin Robinson, has admitted that the Irish Sea border was in fact still in place when he and his party supported the British government deal, which brought the DUP back to Stormont. He says they went back in despite EU law still being applicable to Northern Ireland. Look at these words from the speech tonight.
Our message going forward in this campaign is to send a strong message to the new government, whether Labour or Conservative, that building on the progress to date, we will continue to fight to fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, including removing the application of EU law in our country and the internal Irish Sea border it creates.
So think about that. If they still have to fight to remove the Irish Sea border, that means the Irish Sea border exists. Why did the DUP leadership tell the Unionist electorate the Irish Sea border was gone?
Zero checks, zero customs paperwork on goods moving within the United Kingdom. That takes away the border within the UK between Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
That was then. This is now. The speech given by Gavin Robinson tonight was his first speech as the new leader of the DUP.
Some of the claims made in defence of the command paper when published were based on significant further work that had yet to be completed. And it would have been preferable had the debate been grounded with a greater degree of cautious realism about what was achievable when dealing with the Conservative government more wedded to the European Union than their own country. Progress made, grounded in principle, but with more still to do.
Would have been preferable. Does that mean, Gavin, that your party deliberately oversold to the Unionist people about what had been achieved? And why did you, as the deputy leader, not call it out at the time? Sammy Wilson did, Lord Dodds did, and others.
Essentially, the critical question for many Unionists in Northern Ireland, from various parties and none, is do they remove the Irish Sea border and its cause, the subjection of Northern Ireland to foreign jurisdiction regarding the production of goods and agri-food, a large part of our economy? And the answer is that looked at objectively, looked at clearly and forensically, that they clearly do not. Whatever else they represent, they do not remove at all the serious constitutional, democratic and for many economic damage of the Protocol Windsor framework.
So that command paper deal, Gavin, that you're now saying was oversold to the people, there was Nigel Dodds calling it out. Sammy Wilson called it out too.
Despite the gains which my party leader and deputy party leader have gained in these negotiations, the fact remains that in Northern Ireland there are still EU manned border posts being built which will create a border within our own country. And when the Northern Ireland Assembly sits, ministers and Assembly members will be expected by law to adhere to and implement laws which are made in Brussels, which they had no say over and no ability to amend and no ability to stop.
So the reason this question is really important tonight, this question about Gavin Robinson is really important tonight, is because the new leader of the DUP, Gavin, is making a fresh set of promises. Tonight he said that he's going to fight to get rid of EU law in Northern Ireland.
We will continue to fight to fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, including removing the application of EU law.
How are you going to do that? How are you going to fight to remove EU law? How is it possible without renegotiating the Windsor framework? Is that what you are proposing? Now, we have a packed panel this evening. We want you on air too. We asked the DUP to come in and explain this to us. They weren't available tonight. Owen Tennyson is here from the Alliance Party, Suzanne Breen from the Belfast Telegraph. We've got also Mr. Alistair, Jim Alistair, of course, from the TUV. David Graham is here, the former DUP Special Advisor. and Ben Lowry, of course, is here from the newsletter. Suzanne, can I start with you? So what do you make of that Gavin Robinson speech? Is he saying sorry we oversold this without using the word?
Well, I think he is indicating that he's sorry, but he hasn't used the word sorry. And I think as far as Jim Allister and the TUV is concerned, this is some sort of victory. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And the DUP now is effectively saying that Jim Allister and the TUV were absolutely right, that the Irish Sea border continues to exist, that there continues to be customs checks, not zero checks. And I think Jim Allister has every reason, whether you like him or dislike him or agree with him or disagree with him, this is a victory for him. And there is only one reason why the DUP has moved in this direction, and it's simply because a general election is 5 weeks away. The DUP is down at a 2-year low in the polls at 20%, and the TUV is on 8% in the polls, and the DUP leadership has calculated that it is going to move to the right in an attempt to make up ground.
Owen?
Well, if it's a victory for Jim Allister, Stephen, it is a Pyrrhic one. I mean, I think the fact that it's a Pyrrhic victory.
A Pyrrhic?
Absolutely. I think, this is distraction from the real issues. We have spent the past 8 years relitigating the same old tired and circular arguments about Brexit, and it is clear that the opponents of the Assembly being restored offer no solution or alternative. People like Jim Allister and Jamie Bryson and Alex Easton and the DUP and others, the hardliners within the DUP that is, would only be satisfied if you drained the Irish Sea altogether. We warned at the outset of the referendum that if we came outside of the European Union, that would throw up new borders and barriers that would need to be managed
You're going way
due to
back
our special circumstances. Yes, Stephen, but this all emanates from 2016. And I think voters are tired of it. And I think what voters care about in this election is sending strong voices to Westminster who can actually fight for adjustments to our funding formula to get the investment that we need in our public services. MPs who are focused on stability, delivering reform.
But in his very first speech, the DUP leader is now promising to fight to remove EU law from Northern Ireland.
To what end? To what end, Stephen? What is the alternative? Are we going to have another 5 years of chaos and instability and wrangling at Westminster and collapse at Stormont? Is that really what people are advocating? Because that I just don't think the public will wear that. Alliance is clear in this election that what we are offering is change at Westminster and stability. That means fighting for investment in health and education and all of those issues that people actually care about, but also stability.
Well, the DUP minister has just announced a lot of money to build schools in Northern Ireland. That's Paul Given, a DUP minister.
Investment that could have happened a long time ago had we had the Assembly up and running. And this is the key point, Stephen, because through all of these theatrics and all of the drama and all of the rest, the psychodrama within that party, what is at stake is the stability of our institutions. And that is a key issue in this election, because change to the structures at Stormont will only be delivered through Westminster, and that is what we will be fighting for in this election.
I'll come to you, Jim, in just a second. I believe the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Doug Beattie, can join us now as well. Doug, good evening to you.
Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening. So, it's not Sir Geoffrey Donaldson anymore. Gavin Robinson, new leader of the DUP, now saying that he will fight to remove the application of EU law in Northern Ireland. Do you believe he can realistically do that?
Well, look, Stephen, we're talking about a huge backslide here in many ways. And look, we've been clear in the Ulster Unionist Party that 2 years of boycott achieved nothing. But what it did do, it was excluded absolutely everybody in trying to find solutions to the problems that we have in regard to the Irish Sea border and checks and various other things, including EU law. So we're all excluded from that. And then we got the Safeguarding the Union document. And here's where I agree with Jim Allister. And Jim was very clear. It did not remove the Irish Sea border. We were clear. It did not remove the Irish Sea border. Now, me and Jim don't agree on tactics, but we were absolutely clear on that it did not do what they said it did. And I think in many ways you've hit the nail on the head. There would be nothing said about this today if there wasn't an election in 5 weeks' time. If the election was in November, we would be carrying on with this falsehood that EU law had been negated and the Irish Sea border had gone. That's the only reason we find ourselves where we are Now, what we need to do, for myself as a unionist, and Jim will have a different way of doing this, is we need to look to find ways to deal with the very issues that we've got, while at the same time representing the people who voted us into office. And we've got many challenges ahead of us.
Jim?
Well, I think it is inevitably clear that I and my colleagues were right. The REC border stays under the DUP deal.
Well, Gavin Robinson has pronounced tonight it is here.
Yes, well, that's a change, because Gavin Robinson's fingerprints are all over the safeguarding the union deal that the DUP told us removed the REC border, restored our position in the United Kingdom, removed EU law. So it's welcome that he's faced up to that, but he's now put himself in a position where he's going to the electorate to say, I'm going at Westminster to deliver the very thing I told you the last time I had delivered, but now I have to admit I didn't. I think that raises a fundamental question of trust with any unionist-inclined voter. Who do they believe? Who did they believe about safeguarding the union? If they believed the DUP, then the DUP now tells them they were wrong to believe them because what they said wasn't true. If they believed me, then I think they would be right to say TV and Reform UK and other unionists were right all along.
Maybe that's not as important, Jim, as... I know Owen is describing your arguments as tired old arguments. It's maybe not as important as building schools and reducing waiting lists in the health service
to build our
and
schools.
fixing our roads.
We want to build our schools within a United Kingdom. We want to build our schools where we are not disenfranchised, as we are. 300 areas of law. 300 areas of law which are now presided over by a foreign parliament. Now, that is so fundamental. That may not matter to an anti-unionist like Mr. Tennyson, but it matters a great deal to unionists like me. And, you know, if the DUP...
Let him speak.
Well, sorry, if the DUP is saying tonight that EU law has to go, I welcome that, because that means the single market membership has to go. That means the EU customs code, which says GB is a foreign country, has to go. And with that goes the REC border. That's all good. Let's do it.
Why are you saying change the record?
This is the constitutional fear-mongering that we hear at every single election when people want to distract from their own record. When the Assembly was pulled down, that was disastrous for our public services. When you look at the DUP's record at Westminster, they have supported the destructive policies of the Tories at almost every cut and turn. So that is why people want to talk about article whatever and academic arguments about the protocol.
Sorry, it's not academic. If you say to the people of Northern Ireland, you can't elect MLAs who will decide the law in 300 areas.
It is not what people out there are focused on. The union is not on the ballot paper on the 4th of July.
But if you have...
What is on the ballot paper...
is on the ballot paper.
What is on the ballot paper
it's do you want to restore the union?
Is whether people want to return politicians who will support the destructive policies of the Tories or politicians who will actually go and challenge them and work for change. That is what we are offering. Politicians who are focused on the issues that actually matter to voters and who will work for progressive change.
What you have, Owen, is all the unionist parties tonight expressing deep concerns about the REC border. The DP now admitting that the REC border exists. So why are you being so dismissive about an issue that is of concern
to every unionist. He doesn't care about unionist issues. He doesn't care about the partitioning of the United Kingdom. He's quite happy to see us aligned wholly with the Irish Republic because that's his constitutional alignment.
That is not true, Jim, and you know that.
Oh, I know it all right.
Political unionism has tied itself in contortions over this issue, Stephen. This wasn't an issue for the DUP last week, so forgive me if I'm cynical that it's suddenly an issue when an election is called.
Yeah, but let's be very...
Doug Beattie, where do you think the electorate's list of priorities are? Do you think it is the constitutional issue in this election ahead of education and roads and health?
Look, I think they're all conjoined in many ways, Stephen, if I can. So look, I'm a unionist. I believe in a united community, but I believe in a united community, and my long-term vision is that is within the United Kingdom. There are other people out there who want a united community, but their long-term vision is a united Ireland. That's important to people. It's certainly important to me, and therefore I have to look to that. For those who don't have a long-term vision, for those whose vision is we are a united community and that's it, and they don't have what we're going to do in the future, that's fine. That's up to them. I want to concentrate on schools, on health, on education, on infrastructure, all of those things, housing for our young people, jobs. I want to concentrate on all of that as well. But that doesn't mean I can't have a long-term aspiration for this place remaining within the United Kingdom. What
comes first ahead in this election? Something has to... Something has to come first. What's your key message?
But do they, Stephen? Because if you're telling me that I can only fight this election on a 5-year cycle, so I can only talk about things and then 5 years' time start again, whereas I can fight this election saying I want all of these things for all of our people and work for all of our people, but my long-term aspiration is to stay within the United Kingdom. Why is that not fair? Why is that not valid? Why do I have to put everything in an order where actually what I'm looking at is a 20, 30, 40-year vision ahead, not just a 5-year cycle to the next election?
David, hold on. No, you're not going to be clear just yet. David Graham is a former DUP special advisor with us this evening. Are you surprised what Gavin Robinson has done? Is this to say sorry without saying it? Is this a reset? Some members of the DUP were saying to me today he's pivoting.
I think, Stephen, that having read his speech, I think it's a good speech. I agree with the substance of it. I think it's probably 4 months too late. It should have been what Jeffrey Donaldson was saying in late January. It, at the very least, should have been what Gavin Robinson should have said when he took over after Good Friday. I suppose better late than never. As I say, the substance is there. I'm still at a loss as to how Gavin and the DUP will be able to implement a lot of what he's saying, how they can get fundamental change when it comes to the implementation of EU law. But I think some of his wider commentary as well in terms of making Northern Ireland work for those that see themselves as British, Irish, Northern Irish, I think a lot of that was very good. But there's no doubt certainly that Jim across the table, Jamie Bryce and others have clearly had an influence on where DUP thinking is.
Ben Laurie, do you think it'll work on the doorsteps?
Well, there's a number of things that might work for the DUP. One is the sudden exit of Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, which is totally unrelated to this, but has made this possible. And another is the fact that it's complicated. So the DUP has been a little bit all over the place in this, but lots of people have been all over the place in this because it's a difficult thing to understand. I think it was a nonsense to say there was no Irish sea border. And at the time, I remember being at a briefing for journalists where Geoffrey Donaldson, politely got annoyed with me saying, well, there is an Irish sea border. And now they're trying. So they might get away with that, and they might be seen to be hardline. I do think one thing, we've seen a reason, two people tonight, why this has happened. One is Doug Beattie, one is Jim Allister, because they've both essentially made clear that they have very different visions of unionism. They both agree there's an Irish sea border, but the Ulster Unionist Party does not really want to get into any pacts at all because there's a large feeling within the party, not everybody agrees with this, that it will, if any pact loses votes to alliance. And Jim's position, you can correct me if I haven't got this correctly, is that it's so serious. You can't be getting into a pact with somebody who is not making their position on this Irish sea border clear. So will it work? I don't know. I don't think unionism can survive a division into three.
Can Gavin Robinson, although he was there shoulder to shoulder with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, can he distance himself from what Sir Geoffrey said?
Well, yes, because of the complicated nature of it and the fact that, the DUP 7 tests were always quite malleable. And there's been a lot of movement all along. And if you say, remember what happened when they said, I think it was very damaging to unionism to say that there was no Irish sea border because people believed it. They were delighted. They were elated. Quite senior sort of loyal order figures and so on were congratulating on something that hadn't happened.
So the new promise now in Gavin Robinson's new speech tonight is to fight to get rid of EU law. Now, is that a promise to keep on fighting no matter what, or is that just an aspiration? And the reason I'm asking this is because the DUP have made promises before. Ben referred to them, the 7 tests. Now, let's just have a look at how the 7 tests were described. They were described, look at the very top there, they were described as must. Any new arrangements must. And look at section 3. Not constitute a border in the Irish Sea. But Gavin Robinson then subsequently turned those must-haves into progress. Look at how his exchange went with William Crawley on Talkback.
That if Geoffrey Donaldson, sitting where you are now sitting, had given the answers you've given today, people would not have heard him saying, to my question, does your deal remove the Irish Sea border? Yes. That's what he said. You're giving a much more complicated, much more nuanced answer. And I return to my question, did Jeffrey Donaldson oversell this deal to the unionist community in Northern Ireland particularly by simply giving the answer he gave? Not the answer you gave, but the answer he gave.
So I think people are very unfair in how they present this, because he said it wasn't perfect. He said there was more work to be done, said that on behalf of us all, and that remains true. So that is our position. That was our position. And outlining what you have achieved, knowing that it will take time to implement, is not unique in political negotiations. It is not unique in Northern Ireland, in the cycle and series of things that we have done. But it was important. We had 3 key pillars to assess whenever we were considering the deal. And
You
I
went
can
through the
share them
colours.
with you. No, I haven't been through them at all. The first is, have we achieved progress against our 7 tests? The answer to that is yes. The second...
Well, the question many people are asking is, did you meet your 7 tests?
But that depends what they think, and they recast continually, William.
This is all very slippery, isn't it?
No, it's not.
It's very slippery.
Recast continually.
Did you meet the 7 tests?
Recast
Well, we made
continually
progress
what
on
they
the
are.
7 tests.
We said very clearly, sufficient progress in the 7 tests.
Who decides what's sufficient?
We did.
You decided.
We were involved.
You mark your own homework.
We were involved in those negotiations. They were our tests, and they were matters for us.
Our party
Secondly,
if I want to.
was after 2 years of frantic negotiation, was there going to be a likelihood of further change from the Conservative government,
It's slippery
or more
stuff,
from
this,
the?
isn't it? It's very slippery.
No, don't say that. Would
You
you
have
get more
7
from the
tests.
Would you get more from the Labour government?
The public was basically offered 7 tests, and people were, and you put it in bits of paper for them, so that people could say, well, that's the 7 tests.
Yeah.
And now, well, they're asking the question, did you meet those 7 tests? And then the metric changes.
You went through them. You went through them all at the
Jeffrey
time.
Donaldson told
We
us
can
he
go
met them.
through them all
Jeffrey Donaldson
at the
told us he
time
met
now.
them.
Yeah, and we went through them all at the time now.
We've gone from meting them to making progress. Is this really
We'll go through it.
overselling?
Do you want to go through them again
No, I'm
now?
not gonna go
I'll
through them
stay
again.
for another hour and a half.
I will keep you, but I'm not going through them again.
So, Suzanne, Gavin Robinson there clearly saying that people were recasting that into all the DUP had promised was how much progress would they achieve. It is not what their literature actually said. We can look at it again and look, any new arrangements must. It wasn't framed as progress. And look at Section 3, once again, not constitute a border in the Irish Sea. So, how much credibility does Gavin Robinson have as the new leader of the DUP?
I think that's the problem. And as David said a few minutes ago, if Gavin had made this speech when he assumed the interim leadership, then it may have come across as more genuine and more sincere. I think the danger now is that it looks a little bit opportunistic. Gavin wasn't at the time that the deal was agreed. He wasn't a backbencher. He wasn't somebody of no importance in the DUP, and some of his other Westminster colleagues, they found their voices and they said what they believed. So you would have to ask, why didn't he speak out then, or why didn't he speak out when he became interim leader? There have been so many U-turns with the DUP on the Irish Sea border that, you know, an observer would be beginning to be dizzy. I was with Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. He was in Hillsborough Castle in the throne room, and he so strenuously defended his deal. He held up a sheet of blank paper and he said that is what the TUV and his unionist critics had achieved, and he had achieved the absolute world, the sun, the moon and the stars. And, you know, I think Gavin didn't raise his voice then, and I think that causes problems. Now, this position may well work with voters. The DUP reversed its position, moved to the right before, and it did manage in the opinion polls to claw back some of the ground it lost to the TUV. So it just really depends, what do unionists, voters that are sitting at home, who do they believe? Do they take Gavin Robinson at his word, or do they take Jim Allister and unionist opponents? Who do they believe more? That's going to be the key.
And you're saying, Owen, that Irish Sea border question is not front and centre of people's minds.
No,
that's your pitch, isn't it?
No, I don't believe that it is front and centre of people's minds. I'm not interested in the DUP's tests, and I don't think the public are either. Alliance set out 3 key tests in relation to Brexit: protecting the Good Friday Agreement, upholding our dual market access, and ensuring any agreement was legal and sustainable. That has remained our consistent position throughout, and that is why Alliance is the most trusted party, actually, I believe, on many of these issues, because there are still challenges. in the outworkings of Brexit. We know there are issues with things like veterinary medicines. We know there are issues around dental amalgam, for example. But those things will only be resolved through negotiation, pragmatism and constructive leadership. That is what we have offered throughout, and that is what we will continue to offer in the next Westminster Parliament.
Look, Stephen, in any election, what the fundamental question is one of trust. And for unionists going into this election, the question is, do they trust the flip-flopping DUP who told you REC border's gone, EU law is gone, peace restored in the UK, who now tell you, oh no, not yet, but we will deliver what we told you before we had delivered? Yeah. You know, that flip-flopping...
What are you going to deliver for unionists?
Well, let me deal with the issue. It was the DUP that had the mandate. It was the DUP that told it.
Yes, what will you deliver for this country?
I will deal with that. I will give you a solution to the REC border in a moment, but I'm not going to let go the point that trust is fundamental. The DUP has squandered that trust. They squandered it with Jeffrey Donaldson, with Gavin Robinson standing behind him, nodding in agreement, and now telling us the very opposite. But what is the solution to the REC border? I'll tell you what it is. It's mutual enforcement. It's the fundamental operation of international trade law, that one country that trades with another undertakes the inspection of standards and trade requirements for the recipient country, and they do it one for the other.
Your British government didn't see that as a viable option.
It's still the option of getting rid of the REC border.
What? Breaking an international, getting the British...
You want to talk about broken promises?
Sorry, I'm not interested in this nationalist interloper, frankly. But let's be very clear. The mutual enforcement was the very idea that came out of the EU before the Irish Republic persuaded them
Can you not respect him as a politician with a mandate?
To return the border as the issue.
Can you not respect him as a politician who has a mandate?
He's not contributing to this debate
in
terms of where
which has a
unionism
significantly bigger mandate than yours.
I represent unionists too. I represent people who are nationalist, people who are unionist, and people who don't align. You do not have a monopoly on unionist opinion. And if we're going to talk about broken promises, then let's do that. Because you sold the public a unicorn. You said that we could have all of the benefits of leaving the European Union but not deal with any of the consequences.
We didn't leave.
You have walked us to this position.
We didn't leave the European Union. We were left there.
You walked us to this position, and it's about time you owned it.
That is a falsehood.
You now have
that is a falsehood. Northern Ireland did not get Brexit. We got a protocol that retained EU law, that kept us in the EU single market, that kept us under the customs code. We didn't get Brexit. My alternative is full and proper Brexit for the whole UK, and then mutual enforcement at our border of the respective laws of the two interfacing countries. That's the opportunity that the EU anticipated before later. It's not, how is it a fantasy when it's the basis of international trade everywhere in the world?
We live in a shared and divided society.
And you want to keep it divided by a border.
Hold on. You know, Jim, that Northern Ireland is a complex society. We're the only part of the UK that has a land border with the EU. We were never going to be able to deliver the kind of fantasy hard Brexit that you envisage. It is a fantasy. And the vast majority of MPs at Westminster agree it's a fantasy, Jim. We have spent all of the last 8 years trying to square the circle of a Brexit that doesn't exist.
Because we weren't given Brexit.
Because
it's the Brexit that you want,
because the Brexit that you want is a unicorn, Jim.
No.
And I think we would be far better.
Patter about unicorns. And this little patter that the Vance Party use all the time.
Jim.
But the fundamental constitutional realities are overriding. We did not get Brexit. We were left behind. And it's because we were left behind and treated as part of the EU that we have the problems that the protocol has created.
Instead of investing all of our time and energy engaging in these same circular arguments. I mean, the solutions that you talk about have been looked at and dismissed by experts, so we know that it's not a run.
Hold on. No, he's got to be able to finish now.
Instead of engaging in these tired and circular arguments, we have invested so much time and energy over the past 8 years trying to pick up the pieces of the Brexit you campaigned for. It's about time that you owned it, accept that the Brexit that you promised doesn't exist, and allow everybody in Northern Ireland to move on and focus on the issues that actually matter. Because frankly, Jim, I don't think the union is well served by your brand of unionism.
Well,
Ruairí O'Kane is with us this evening. We'll come back to you later in the show. Ruairí is a former SDLP Director of Communications. Hello, Ruairí.
Good evening, Stephen.
Well, how do you think this will go down in the nationalist community, Ruairí?
I think National will be looking on at this, and I think nationalism is quite relaxed and confident at the moment. And I think as we go into this election, nationalism doesn't have to really do a lot. It can very much stand still. And I think when people are looking at the dynamics of the election and potential outworkings of it, where you see, for example, Sinn Féin perhaps going for a hat-trick of becoming the largest party at Council, Assembly and at Westminster, nationalism can do that without actually winning any seats. But I think what we're seeing today is sort of quite extraordinary in terms of U-turns that we've seen. Gavin Robinson talking, I think, in Ben's paper in February, talked about this deal as being the best deal available, had done away with the Irish Sea border, and he may try and row back from Jeffrey Donaldson's words, but he can't row back from his own. And I think what it probably does call into question is not only a matter of trust, but also a matter of judgment. And I think that's going to be very important, especially within unions as well.
But the judgment, Rory, was that people wanted Stormont to be running again. The judgment clearly was that people wanted the likes of Paul Givan to be announcing millions of pounds to build schools, the likes of Gordon Lyons to be announcing millions of pounds for sport.
I think that's fair enough. I think there was that groundswell, but I think what the DUP have got themselves into trouble with is that they clearly said that this deal had buy-in and support, and it's obviously listened to other elements of within unionism from Doug Beattie and Jim Allister. It didn't, and they're the ones who can turn around to say they've been consistent on this matter. And Gavin Robinson, when he comes to a campaign, who's he campaigning against? He's campaigning against himself.
Doug Beattie?
Well, look, I can only repeat what I said to you already. Stephen, we didn't have to have 2 years of boycott to get us to where we are now, because we haven't progressed one bit whatsoever. It is still a valid point and an issue for people to say, I'm concerned about an Irish Sea border, I'm concerned about EU law. It is valid, and people shouldn't just bat it away as not being valid. But you know what? We didn't need that 2 years of hardship. We didn't need people to be left on the verge without proper government, without people trying to work on their behalf, to allow our health service to crumble in the manner it did. We didn't need that. And the reality is, Stephen, and Jim will know this too, we were kept out of everything for 2 years. This was a single negotiation between the DUP and the UK government, and everybody else was kept in the dark, didn't know what was going on until the Safeguarding the Union document appeared, and then we told that the world has been saved, the Irish Sea border is gone, EU law doesn't apply. And we clearly said at the time that is false. So that's where we are now. It was a false promise then. But what we need to do is move forward. And we have spent an awful lot of time talking about what went before. We didn't support Brexit. We didn't support the protocol. But we need to move on now.
You heard Doug Rory there talking about how Sinn Féin doesn't really need to do anything here. And you're a political leader, of course, that has refused to do pacts with other unionist parties in order to protect unionism, would be the charge.
Look, I do what's good for and best for the country, for its people, and then ultimately at the end for the party. And we will stand on our own 2 feet and make our own decisions in regards to that.
But are you big enough and strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet?
Sorry, Stephen.
Are you big and strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet? Why not?
Well, I am. You know, you will have seen over this last nearly a week now how much pressure that people have been putting me under in regards to Fermanagh and South Tyrone, and we stood our ground. We stood our ground.
The DP standing aside. We heard that in Gavin Robinson's speech tonight.
Who we announced in January of this year, having only lost that seat by 57 votes. And it was quite clear that if we're going to get it back, it's going to be through an Ulster Unionist Party candidate. So we stood our ground on that. So, of course, we have the strength to stand on our own 2 feet.
Are you running a candidate in Fermanagh and South Tyrone?
All our candidates will be announced on Friday, and you will know the answer to that question.
Are you running a candidate or you're not?
You will hear on Friday where we're running our candidates. But let's be very clear. The DUP not only falsely sold
talking about your party.
Issues. Yes, but I'm talking about the fundamental.
You won't tell us if you're running a candidate.
Not until Friday.
Why?
How
this is
many times
Wednesday.
do I have to tell you that? Because this isn't Friday. Friday is our announcement. So just suck it up. Now, let's be very clear. The DUP missold their deal. But the more important thing really is, apart from the issue of trust and judgment, is that in mis-selling their deal, they give up all their leverage. They told us we've got rid of the Irish Sea border, EU law, so we can go back into Stormont. Now they tell us we didn't get rid of the Irish Sea border, we didn't get rid of EU law, but we've given up our leverage. What sort of judgment is that?
Professor John Tongue joining us this evening as well from the University of Liverpool. John, good evening to you.
Good evening, Stephen.
I'd love your analysis, John, tonight as to where you think the ground lies here in Northern Ireland with what will motivate people to vote, those policy issues, the constitutional issue, the DUP. Well, let me just show you all, actually, what a couple of insiders, this is just a couple of insiders from the DUP tonight. We asked the DUP themselves to come on. Some other people are talking to us behind the scenes. Let me show you what one insider said to me this morning, and you can read that. Leadership is now pivoting. The leadership is now pivoting and admitting the deal was oversold. I clearly need glasses. And the next one, Ben, you're going to have to read this for me because I can't see it.
There is no pretense anymore that the Irish sea border has gone away. The problem, Gavin, I can barely see this, now has is that since we signed up to the agreement, how do we get rid of EU law? That is a problem for the party. The agreement needs to be renegotiated.
And that's what a different insider told me this morning. John, your analysis.
It's an extraordinary electoral strategy from the DUP to basically say, look, what we told you a few months ago doesn't really hold anymore. There is an Irish sea border and there is EU law. Of course, those two things still apply. There's always been an Irish sea border. The question was how visible and how much friction it caused. Of course, there's EU law. Why would you need the Stormont break to try and disapply laws or stop those laws if there wasn't EU laws being applied to Northern Ireland? So it was always oversold.
But Gavin Robinson, John's going further than that tonight. He is saying that his party's deal was oversold. That's what he's saying.
Exactly, and that's one of the more suboptimal election strategies that I can think of. It might have been better to maintain the pretense until after the election, because now, where does he go? The fact is that the majority of the electorate backed the safeguarding of the union deal. The majority of unionist electors backed the safeguarding of the union deal, but there's a significant section of unionists who don't like it, and clearly, Gavin Robinson has been spooked by them. Perhaps he's been spooked by the opinion poll that Suzanne mentioned earlier that shows the DUP way below its 2019 level of support. But if you go off chasing those opponents of the deal, are you going to do any better electorally? If it looks like you've not been straight with the electorate a few months earlier, then that can get you into even bigger electoral difficulties. So I see the dilemma for the DUP, but I'm not sure that now saying, well, actually, what we told you a few months ago was really, really overselling it. I'm not sure that approach, although it might be honest, is necessarily going to pay dividends at election time. And whilst Jim Allister can speak for himself, I'd be very surprised if the TUV was to stand down in constituencies on the basis of what Gavin Robinson has offered tonight.
Well, he won't tell us, will he? Because apparently this is Wednesday and Friday's Friday.
Absolutely. You'll just have to wait.
Well, I'll take a punt that the TUV will still stand in East Belfast, notwithstanding the contrition that has been offered to some extent by Gavin Robinson tonight.
Brendan has been out and about in Belfast today to get some reaction.
Is the issue of the Irish sea border important to you when voting in this election?
Not important at all.
Why not?
Well, I don't think it makes any difference. We're going to just have it whether we want it or not, so we may as well just be prepared to put up with it.
It is going to be on my mind while we're voting. It might make people's, the struggle of the cost of living crisis a bit worse.
I just think because I'm young, I don't really care. As awful as that sounds, I don't know, there's other things on my mind that I would be more focused on.
Yeah, clearly, obviously it matters. It's going to affect goods coming into the country. It's an important thing. Products you can get, something to combat the rising costs of everything. That's important.
Other things like cost of living,
yes,
health service, local politics, our local environment, those are way above the Irish sea border.
It wouldn't be as important, as I say, as the other more major issues with the health service, with schools and everything else. I think that's more of an issue for me than the border.
I think it's a risk because we think the EU is a risk anyway.
Okay.
So we do, and it wouldn't help the country in the long run, we don't think.
Not particularly, I mean, it doesn't impact on me at all, I'm over the Yorkshire and back again and stuff, and I don't see any difference, to tell you the truth.
I don't feel we're capitalising on the potential of this agreement, and I think it's costing our little country dear for it. For the likes of people who are exporting and stuff like that there, you know, at the end of the day, we have a foothold in Europe, and we're also part of the GB still, so I just feel there's so much more potential for us to expand what this country produces and sell to the rest of the world, rest of Europe and into the GB. I don't see what the issue is. You know, I think people are making more issue out of it.
David Graham, those voices, obviously a mixture of opinion. Do you think those people who are motivated to go out to vote now will be going right back through the whole tranche of what's happened, or is it about the now?
Well, look, I think, and to pick up on what Owen said earlier, he is right in that, you know, fundamentally, no one cares a great deal else about their family and their family's health and educating their children and driving in good roads. That's fine. But I think you've also then got to look at Stormont and the return of Stormont, and Doug Beattie's entirely right. It does make the last 2 years futile because, as Jim rightly says, the DUP have lost leverage. But I wouldn't underestimate, I should say, the fact that to someone like me as a unionist, the implementation of EU law is fundamentally against what I believe in. Nevertheless, I want the best education for my children, the best health service for my family. So this is not
But
binary.
while there's EU law, is it not as simple as this? While there's EU law, there's a border down the Irish Sea. Is it not as simple as that?
It is as simple as that. It is as simple as that, Jim. But sorry, Stephen. But it is also
if you
important to
ever
highlight.
call me him again, you are in trouble.
Freudian slip.
The writ's on its way.
But I think it's very important to highlight that there are real world examples where Jim is right to say it does impact upon our everyday life. But I think it's going to be a high wire act for Gavin Robinson and Naomi Long to an extent as well in East Belfast to balance what unionists believe is fundamentally important to the constitutional future of Northern Ireland and making Northern Ireland work on a day and daily basis.
But we don't know your position on the Constitution, do we? Or Naomi's, or anybody in your party.
I think the media like to obsess over this, Stephen, but I think the public get it.
What country you're in?
Well,
what country you want to be in?
No,
that's an
people
obsession,
understand.
Is it?
I mean, we are a party made up of people who are nationalist, unionist, and people who don't align. I'm somebody who's open-minded about the future.
Open-minded?
I'm open-minded.
And is it a coincidence that every member of the Alliance Party is open-minded?
Some aren't.
None of you would like to be British and none of you would like to be
represent-
Irish. You're all open-minded.
We are neither a United Ireland party or a United Kingdom party. We are a United Community Party, and that is what binds us all together, irrespective of different constitutional aspirations. And I actually think that's a positive thing, Stephen, that the third largest party in Northern Ireland, with all of the history and all of the conflict that has gone in years gone by, actually has a party which is about uniting people, not territory.
Would it not be more realistic if there were members of your party who were, some of them were saying, I prefer to be British, some of them were saying, I prefer to be nationalist, rather than every one of them being open-minded?
Some of our members do.
Who?
Who's
ever declared which they are
But
within your
our
party?
elected
right now?
representatives are always conscious
Name
that
me
we
what one
represent
is.
people from across the community. So we're not going to misappropriate the support for us as support for a particular constitutional outcome. That is not what we go to the voters and ask for. We ask for support to deliver progressive and inclusive policies, and that is what we do consistently.
Owen said something very revealing there. You said that our party is made up of unionists and nationalists and others. So think about the implications of that, because we often hear that the constitutional question isn't very important. And we get these polls, sometimes I think with leading questions, which love to show that unionists care more about the health service than they do about the UK. What country you belong to, what nation state, is extraordinarily important. And you know how we know that it's important to people in Northern Ireland? 80% of people in Northern Ireland still vote for parties election after election after election that is primarily organised on its position on the constitutional future. It's 80 to 82%. And the centre ground has risen. And you're also telling us that many people in Alliance still think of themselves as unionist nationalists. So it's a very important thing. And for unionists, Rory is probably right. This is a fairly easy election for nationalists and maybe for Sinn Féin. They've had a victory in this, and there's a number of reasons why. I was not like Jim. I thought Brexit was very perilous, and it's panned out really, really badly. But unionists are, of course, upset about it. See, and there's one other thing, because it took a while to come in, and I want to say, because I think a lot of people will be confused whether there's a border or not. This is the thing that the DUP tried to claim, that if there are effectively no checks or checks you don't know about, there isn't a border. You know who rejected that argument in reverse? Nationalist Ireland wasn't having a word of it because the UK bent over backwards to say we won't even have CCTV camera at the border. And there was a major poll by Queen's. It found that only 20% of nationalists would find CCTV objectionable at the border, and only 10% of nationalists would want to vandalise such cameras. 10% to 40% is 4% of the population would want to vandalise CCTV. What is that? It's a dissident Republican position that the UK, in its weakness,
it's not
conceded.
Republican position.
Yes, I'm saying it's wanting to have violence in cameras. It's heading towards a dissident Republican position. It's not the Sinn Féin
What about
position.
the fact that our dairy industry relies on smooth transfer of goods north and south for processing and onward sale? What about the fact that alignment with EU law opens up a huge international market for export?
What about the fact that our biggest market is GB and all the raw materials from GB are subject to EU tariffs and checks?
What about the fact that the next Labour government is actually going to look to align more closely with
Labour haven't
Europe,
won the election
and that
yet.
will minimise?
Labour haven't won the election.
I'm
Let's see who
fairly
wins
optimistic and hopeful that Labour will win the next election, and I hope there's
who
a
knows?
change in government. But
Let's
they will
see.
look to align more closely with the European Union. That will mitigate some of the friction in the Irish Sea. But this is a product of devolution. In Northern Ireland, we have always done things differently. Jim advocates that we do things differently on social issues. He's more than entitled to do that. That is no more a threat to the Union than us having a different status on trade.
A border down the Irish Sea is a fundamental manifestation
Do you
of
believe in
threat
a border
to
in the
the
Irish
Union.
Sea for women's rights? Do you
I
believe in a border in the Irish Sea
that
for
does not
LGBT rights?
constitutionally divide us. If those issues are devolved to which you refer, then it's Northern Ireland should decide them. But on the constitutional issue, you cannot put a tariff border in the Irish Sea and say you're still a part of the United Kingdom and align that part with the Irish Republic economically.
One of the most vocal activists against the Windsor framework, he was a campaigner, still is a campaigner, Jimmy Bryson, joining us this evening. Jimmy, what do you make of Gavin Robinson's speech?
Well, I'm glad that he joined up with myself and Jim again, agreeing that we were right in what we said all along. And I do have to say, me and Jim stood at Stormont. We done a press conference. We give our own views on this deal. The Irish Sea border remained, EU law remained, and we said that it was a story of falsehoods, that whole deal, and we were mocked and we were derided. We held up an opinion from Northern Ireland's former Attorney General, John Larkin, KC, a legal opinion, and Jeffrey Donaldson, and I have to say with Gavin beside him, waved it away. And here we are 6 months later. Jim was right, I was right, and by implication, Gavin Robinson and those who sold that deal were wrong. And what they told the unionist people was incorrect. But great stuff. We've now accepted our position that EU law has to go. So there'll be no more applicability.
Renegotiate an international agreement?
Look, listen.
Get the British government to simply throw their international agreement in the bin?
Listen, absolutely. But I'll tell you what we can do.
Absolutely, did you just say? Are you for real?
Well, they should throw it in the bin, but listen, this is what the DUP can do. So they say they oppose EU law, great stuff. There'll be no more applicability motions to support EU law in the Assembly. Every time a piece of EU law comes, they'll be pulling the Stormont brake. And tomorrow, Gavin Robinson will obviously disavow the concept of dual market access, because in order to have dual market access, you have to have EU law. So if you oppose EU law, then you have to oppose dual market access. I mean, you can't have both. So, I mean, great stuff that Gavin has accepted Jim and I's position and has now moved back to accepting the Irish Sea border remains and has to go.
Of course, Gavin also talked in his speech about the progress that had been made, and he was essentially saying that it's a piece of work where there still needs more progress to be done.
What progress was actually made? It embedded the Irish Sea border. And look, if the DUP accept the Irish Sea border is still there, as we said and they now accept, they accept EU law as the original sin, the fundamental evil. Well, why is the DUP and the executive implementing an Irish Sea border? That's the logic of the position they've now accepted.
Is this the problem Gavin now has?
I think this absolutely is the problem. People that were dismissed as dead-end unionists, the DUP has now moved on to their territory. Look, there is, in the real world, there is no good Brexit for unionists, I believe, in Northern Ireland. There is simply just the least worst form of Brexit. That is where it's at. And how is the DUP going to fight all this? It stayed out of Stormont. It was out for 2 years. Did that get rid of the Irish-Sea border? No, it didn't. So I think this is really just about elections, campaigning and sloganeering. I don't see how in reality the DUP are going to deliver.
It did get mitigations. I think somebody needs to point out that the DUP got, first of all, the Windsor Framework, which was a mitigation on what would have been the full implementation of the protocol, which would have been disastrous. And then it got, further mitigations. I think it's fair to say that. Of course, many people would be very unhappy about the way that they went about it. But
I know this is a big issue for the unionist community, but for the majority in Northern Ireland, they are not preoccupied with the protocol and they are not preoccupied with the Irish-Sea border.
And another thing, I'm so sorry, this does have to be said because it's so easily forgotten. Sinn Féin did bring down Stormont for 3 years, and very quickly its key issue became an Irish Language Act. And I think it's difficult for unionists to stomach the fact that there is different treatment for Sinn Féin. It's allowed to have a Bobby Story mass terrorist funeral in flagrant breach of COVID, and nothing happens. There's all these reports which effectively find that it was all a bit unfortunate, no one's to blame. My goodness, when there's a proper inquiry comes into town, Sinn Féin changes its tune. So unionists are dealing with this, and I think that the DUP should have said, if it was going back, look, this isn't great. We're doing this for the benefit of Northern Ireland, and we live in a society where there are different standards for one party, and we have to just accept that.
Did they? And now their new leader is saying, if you look at the words of that speech, the only way to interpret the part where he talks about the overselling is that the DP oversold what they had achieved. It is the effect of that and whether people will move on. This is one opinion, and obviously this is about people who turned up to an anti-protocol rally. Brendan went down to Ballyclare to speak to them. Now, of course, this is going to be strong opinion on one side, as you would expect. We have asked the DUP to come in. They'll be welcome on the radio show. They'll be welcome right throughout BBC Northern Ireland. But have a listen to what some of the people at this rally said.
Just right here in Ballyclare Square, the march has just happened. The band is just finishing up here.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you just all move in a bit closer, please?
Hello, Ballyclare.
After the main speeches were over, I went out and about to try and get a sense of the strength of feeling about the protocol.
Why are you here tonight?
Well, I'm a member of the TUV, and it's great to have these gatherings together and explain the protocol and the problems that they face, especially with the legal judgment that has shown us that it's not just trade, but it's more than trade that matters. We're now a dumping ground for immigrants as well.
We have come from Belfast to support this rally. This is my friend lives in Ballyclare, and these people are speaking the truth.
What about you, madam?
Well, I'm just disappointed. I've been a DUP supporter all my life, and I'm just disappointed in the way things have gone. And I have to say, I agree with every word that was said on that platform tonight.
The DUP is quite clear. This deal removes the Green Lane.
Rubbish.
Rubbish.
Rubbish. The DUP are liars. They are liars.
They would refute that.
Well, I don't care. They are liars. They can't refute it because it's plain for everybody to see.
Legally proven that they've told lies.
But the deal's done.
I know it is, yeah, but it shouldn't have been done.
The protocol shouldn't be here. There should be no Irish-Sea border, and we're looking rid of it.
Well, the DUP has said this deal, there's no the Green Lane's gone.
Lies,
there's no more checks on
lies.
goods in Northern Ireland that will remain here.
No. Don't believe them. Don't trust them.
Why don't you believe them?
Because they've let us down so many times since 2007, I believe, and just can't put no faith in them.
They must think we're mad if we believe that it isn't there. Of course it's there. And, we're now no longer a sovereign state, and anything that takes away from us being British is wrong. And I think the Speaker spoke very well tonight, and I believe, what they said to me, that would be true.
We're fed a diet of lies, and I hate everybody's entitled to their opinion, but lying is one thing.
Well, the DUP's been very clear. This deal will mean there'll be no Green Lane, there'll be no checks on goods staying here in Northern Ireland.
Did you believe them?
Do you believe them?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because they couldn't tell the truth.
Doug Beattie, that's there's not a huge turnout at those rallies. Well, there wasn't. So you can pout your lips all you want. There was no huge turnout.
There was more than there's ever turned out to support the protocol.
Doug Beattie, going forward, have you done any deals with any political parties, the DUP or others? Are you standing candidates in all constituencies?
Well, I've a number of candidates that I've still got to announce, and there's good reasons why we haven't announced them. But our aim is to stand candidates right across Northern Ireland. No, we haven't done any deals. Have we spoken? We've been speaking. I've even been on your programme many times, Stephen, to say we've had conversations way last year, talking about a whole variety of different things. And we'll always talk, and unionism should talk, and where they can, they should.
Are you standing a candidate in North Belfast?
Well, that selection and process hasn't been completed yet.
Have you agreed to stand a candidate down who you were contemplating in North Belfast?
No, look, Stephen, the nominations close on the 7th of next month. That's when we will have our candidates that are standing will be nominated, and there's good reasons why some are not being announced just now. We've got some who have children who are going through exams, and they don't want to disrupt their children going through exams, so they just don't want their names to be out there at this moment in time. So there's good reasons for that, and people just need to understand that this is not just about sticking a name out there. This is about people who, once they go out there, are being scrutinised every minute and everything they say. So those names will come out in due course.
Professor John Tong, your closing comments.
Well, just on that, on the issue of candidates, I mean, clearly, the unionist electors do favour PACs, and where PACs are possible, it makes perfect sense. Doug Beattie pitched his tent very, very quickly in Fermanagh and South Tyrone and basically warned off all comers and basically announced a UUP candidate. I think that makes perfect sense, given the UUP's history there. In terms of the broader picture, the fact is that the DUP cannot assuage every single unionist elector. The survey suggests that a majority of unionist electors are comfortable with the safeguarding of the union document, but there's a substantial minority that are opposed to it. You can't ride both of those horses, but it looks as if Gavin Robinson is beginning to try and attempt that again this evening.
And Rory O'Kane, obviously we don't have time to get into it in detail, but Sinn Féin's announcement around Pat Cullen, who, of course, from the was in the RCN, very prominent national member of the RCN, now running.
Yeah, I mean, that was a masterstroke that no one quite saw. I mean, for Sinn Féin to attract a candidate of that calibre, certainly on paper, basically shows where they are right now. And I think, I mean, there's so many fascinating battles in the election ahead, from constituencies which have a small majorities to those who have huge majorities. I think there'll be a lot of eyes on many places across the north.
OK. Well, listen, thank you very much to everybody, to Jamie, to Ben, to Jim, to Owen, to Suzanne, to David. Thank you for coming in this evening. And to Doug Beattie, of course. Nearly forgot about you, Doug. How could I do that? Thanks for staying with us. And John Tong and Rory. Thank you very much. We will pick this all up on the radio in the morning on BBC Radio Ulster, the biggest show in the country, and all that. So we'll start at 9 o'clock. Before we do so, just from me, thank you very much indeed for watching all these programmes and listening to us here on BBC Radio Ulster, which we'll do at 9 in the morning. Until then, sleep well, good night and thank you.